That's right, this time I'm not messing around. This is the story of how one bug brought down an empire. If you could draw a line between every port city it owned, it would wrap around the globe twice. Britain had become so big that the royal family had to take trains just to visit their own territories. And yet within 2 decades it would lose all of it. Blame it on the mosquitoes, or maybe it didn't, it's hard to say. She looked like an orange in a field of apples. He kept getting stung by bees and it was starting to irritate him. Bees, you see, are one of humanity's original archenemies, right up there with back pain, bad breath, and IT managers who insist that sending a memo is the same as holding a town hall meeting. And, as we all know, the best way to fight a crocodile attack is a massive bee swarm. They swarmed into the vehicle, biting the king repeatedly. Despite the best efforts of his servants, he was covered in hives within minutes. Too embarrassed to seek treatment, he died of an allergic reaction the following night at 62. Unfortunately, it didn't work out that well. Was it the Americans who spilled the first blood in the War of 1812? The Canadians who rose up and defended their own flag against American invasion attempts? This opened the floodgates for Japan to invade, leading to the Second World War, and when that was over, everybody just went home and the global order fell apart. The Australians who made the first move toward independence in 1901? Or was it the Indians who took matters into their own hands after enduring the Jallianwala Bagh massacre? A random historical event caused by a combination of factors. Who knows? It's hard to say. Sometimes the world just ends because it has to, and sometimes it ends because of a mosquito. It doesn't really matter because it wasn't any of those. On November 28, 1910, King Rama V was inspecting his latest acquisition, a brand new armored car made out of thick glass, perfect for spotting snipers and, letting your skin breathe. Our old buddy, George II, had died in 1760, and by 1840, most of the toys in his collection were already broken. All those guys have horrible imperial track records, too. Or you could blame the bees, since if the king hadn't gotten annoyed at them, he wouldn't have gone to war, wouldn't have been exposed to mosquitoes, wouldn't have gotten sick, and he might have lived long enough to oversee the collapse of his own empire. Or you could blame the mosquito net, since if it hadn't been invented, George and Charlotte might have ended up like Romeo and Juliet, except with more velvet and less poison. What remained of the British Empire was held together by nothing more than sheer inertia. And when that ran out, it would die quickly. There was just one problem. It wasn't air-conditioned and Thailand was having a heat wave. So the king decided to drive his new toy around the city until sunset, which meant he'd be driving straight into the sunset, right through a giant cloud of mosquitoes. King Rama V hated those itchy, fuzzy things. And if he hated something, he hated it enough to wage war over it. So he called over his royal physician, Nathaniel Stubbs, and told him to make sure she didn't get bitten by any mosquitoes. He reigned until his own death in 1925 and was succeeded by the aforementioned King Ananda Mahidol, the one who may or may not have been shot by a mysterious force while bathing in his underwear. But by this point, the British Empire was in sharp decline. Its great colonies of India, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand were becoming increasingly independent. World War I had stripped it of its wealth and morale and left it with the monumental task of administering a collapsing empire. So it's not surprising that even if they had known about the Siamese king's demise, they wouldn't have cared all that much. Why? To keep her as unblemished as possible, of course. That's right, he wanted to destroy the bees to avenge his friend. You see, this king had a loyal advisor named Prince Momchau Chokachai. Now, Momchau was a cool dude. He liked to have fun. And one day he decided to go for a swim in the Royal Grand Palace's pool, a beautiful oasis of calm in the busy city. He took off his clothes, dove in head first, and drowned. It wasn't exactly clear how that happened because nobody could find his body. Either it was the overly enthusiastic dragon statues whose mouths were conveniently located directly above the water, or it was a pack of hungry crocodiles that the king refused to get rid of despite everyone complaining about them. After all, the queen was his wife and would bear him children who would one day inherit the greatest collection of shiny toys the world had ever seen. As a result, Stubbs became the first person in history to invent mosquito nets. along with a special pillow designed to be tucked underneath them so the royal couple could snuggle without poking themselves in the face. When Siam first started its empire, building thing was hot. Every ruler tried to outdo the last, whether in temples, palaces, or military parades. It was one of the shortest wars in history, lasting only 100 years. The Thais lost against the French, but it turned out to be a blessing in disguise. Since they couldn't fight the French on land, they fought them in the courts of international arbitration, winning control of vast swaths of land. By 1907, the country was 500 times larger than its original borders. The king dubbed himself the conqueror of the Mekong River and the Chao Phraya River and the Malay Peninsula. It was a nice title. Basically, he was just very good at paperwork, which came in handy during World War II, when he spent most of it writing protest letters to both the Japanese and the Allies. In 1683, King Narai I built a new capital and called it Bangkok, which basically means City of Angels. It was more like City of Mosquito Nests, since Thai kings spent their days lounging in windowless rooms, completely covered in fine silk. You might call it a kind of reverse Iron Man suit. In 1928, England was at the height of its worldwide power trip. Our story begins in Africa. As for George II, he became King of Great Britain in 1727 and was famous for two things: dyeing his hair a shocking shade of orange and hosting massive balls where nobles would wear up to 10 kilos of velvet while dancing. They loved to party, live large, hang in the open windows of their palaces, and basically attract as many mosquitoes as possible. They knew full well what would happen next, though. The only question was, who would die first? He took his job seriously. His portrait alone cost £40,000 in today's money. Oh, and he loved to play Minecraft. I mean, he commissioned a scaled-down version of London built entirely out of sugar cubes so he could practice city planning and defend it from his favorite pastime, burning his own palaces down. And yes, he did do that a lot. In fact, when he got bored of one palace, he'd simply set it on fire and move into another one of his many lavish homes. But why am I telling you this? Because those two kings lived in two of the biggest cities in the world, centers of culture, commerce, and breeding grounds for disease. One day, King George caught sight of a particularly juicy target, 17-year-old Queen Charlotte. Meanwhile, across the globe, the King of Siam had less romantic concerns. On December 1898, Thailand declared war on Cambodia because it was home to the world's largest bee farm, run by the French. But now let us talk about the real reason why the king started fighting in the first place: revenge. Either way, the king vowed to avenge his friend and get rid of all the pools in his kingdom. As luck would have it, the thick glass offered excellent protection against bullets, not so much against pesky insects. At this point, Siam was ruled by its absolute monarchy, meaning the throne passed to the king's brother, King Rama VI. Instead, they were watching their own house of cards crumble. We don't know who actually dealt the killing blow. In fact, it was none other than a bunch of unemployed Chinese immigrants who attacked the Opium War debt holders in the Second Sino-Japanese War, seizing Manchuria, Korea, Vietnam, and large parts of China itself. You could blame the Chinese, but you could also blame the Germans, the Russians, the Italians, or the Belgians. Or, maybe it was just one of those things. On January 29, 1931, the world stood still. The cause: the death of one of history's most famous pharaohs, the boy king Tutankhamun. The discovery became one of the most important of the 20th century, marking a turning point in our understanding of ancient Egypt, but it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. After Carter opened the tomb, strange things started happening. That would be the era of the greatest Egyptian rulers, people like Ramesses II, Akhenaten, Nefertiti, and their ilk. Unlike the spoiled princes and princesses of Europe, he didn't have any siblings, so the throne was his and his alone. That was until he kicked the bucket at the ripe old age of 19. Now, we don't know exactly how he died, but the leading theories revolve around two basic ideas: sickness or injury. What we do know is that a mosquito or malaria may have played a role. Only about 40 of them transmit malaria, and not all of them carry the same parasites. Well, you can ask no one because no one knows. The earliest reference to malaria itself, however, comes from Greek physician Hippocrates. That breakthrough earned him the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 1907. As for preventing the disease, about 200 to 300 million people contract the illness each year, most of them in Africa. Of those cases, between 500,000 and 1 million will be fatal. Most victims are kids under the age of 5. The first effective mosquito repellent wasn't invented until 1898, and the first antimalarial drug, called pamaquine, wasn't synthesized until 1938. By then, people like Tutankhamun had been dead for thousands of years. Like the Chinese, he prescribed herbal treatments and recommended bloodletting as a cure. Other ancient civilizations had their own methods, including the Aztecs who used agave sap as a painkiller. The answer is no. There have been no reports of malaria or any other contagious illnesses spreading at the British Museum or anywhere else. If he did get malaria from a mosquito, he wouldn't be the last. Thanks for watching. The risk of contracting anything at a museum is extremely low. Even still, there are always risks when traveling to areas with diseases you aren't familiar with. But trust us, a trip to the museum won't kill you unless you fall down a flight of stairs. Watch your step. And the indigenous peoples of Borneo who drank a tonic made from the leaves of a rainforest shrub. But none of these treatments worked, or at least not well enough for us to hear about them today. Ancient records of the disease are rare, if they exist at all. We know the symptoms of malaria today because Europeans documented them in detail in the early days of the Roman Empire. It was commonly called the tertian fever because patients typically experienced fevers every third day. The Romans also noted that people with the illness often died. Given that we know very little about the social and economic impacts of malaria in antiquity, it's impossible to say how it affected the course of human history. It certainly didn't help matters, though. The type of malaria that the Pharaoh's mosquito likely transmitted is called Plasmodium falciparum. This parasite is the deadliest of the bunch, accounting for about half of all malaria-related deaths. Unfortunately for humans, it's also the easiest to contract. But if the pesky insect did play a role, it wasn't an isolated incident. Malaria has been plaguing humanity for thousands of years. According to the World Health Organization, the disease is found in more than 100 countries and territories. And in 2021, it was responsible for more than 500,000 deaths worldwide. Most of these cases occur in Africa, where the Anopheles gambia mosquito, one of the deadliest species of the insect, lives. Let's look at sickness first because this is where our mosquito comes in. But the dynasty was fading into infamy. The country was beset by economic hardship and its borders were shrinking. Further analysis suggests that the parasite entered his body through a mosquito bite. You see, malaria is spread by Anopheles mosquitoes infected with Plasmodium parasites. The parasite multiplies inside the mosquito, and when the infected insect bites someone, it transfers the parasite into that person's bloodstream. There, the parasites infect liver cells and multiply further before infecting red blood cells. This can lead to cycles of fever, chills, sweats, headache, muscle pain, and fatigue. If left untreated, malaria can quickly become fatal. Into this maelstrom was born a baby boy whose original name was probably Tutankhamun. Remember, just because he had malaria doesn't mean he died from it. Anything could have happened. For instance, maybe a chicken ran into him while he was walking and sent him into cardiac arrest. But moving on to injury, maybe the mosquito played a role here too? In 1998, a British physician suggested that Tutankhamun died from the effects of a broken leg. He noted that the bones in the mummy's feet were misaligned, suggesting an old injury. In fact, X-rays revealed that the boy king had a right foot slightly shorter than his left, which could be the result of a healed fracture. The doctor believed the break occurred when Tutankhamun was a kid, causing long-term complications that ultimately led to his demise. How he broke his leg, however, is anybody's guess. Maybe he fell off a chariot or stepped on a landmine. Well, not a landmine, but something like that. A donkey, perhaps. Donkeys are pretty much like landmines, only cuter. He took the throne around age 9, changed his name, and moved the capital back to Thebes. Why? We don't know. But it doesn't matter. The point is that the young king had no idea what he was doing. Fortunately for him, he had advisors who knew what they were doing, namely his advisors. People involved with the excavation began getting sick and dying under mysterious circumstances. They were afflicted by everything from insect bites to respiratory problems, even blindness. Some didn't make it out at all. One man, an author named Arthur Wegg, got bitten by a beetle during the dig and perished before he could get treatment. Others, like the Egyptologist Flinders Petrie, claimed the tomb was cursed. Whatever was happening, the press latched onto it, fueling decades of speculation about the so-called curse of the pharaohs. Nearly 3 millennia after he ruled over Egypt, he had finally kicked the bucket. Or did he? Well, that depends on whether or not you think a deadly mosquito is responsible for ending the boy king's life. Let us rewind to 1913 when British archaeologist Howard Carter stumbled across the burial chamber of the lost pharaoh. Now, normally we wouldn't pay much attention to such tales. There are just too many reports of spooky curses to take them seriously. However, Tutankhamun's final moments might be one of those rare instances where there's more smoke than fire. And at the center of it all, according to some, is a simple mosquito. But how does a bug kill a king? Well, let's start at the beginning. The year was 1323 BC, and the new kingdom of Egypt was coming to an end. While Tutankhamun was just a figurehead, he did have one major advantage over other boy kings. According to the Smithsonian, scientists recently discovered trace amounts of malaria in the preserved tissue of Tutankhamun's remains. Now, it's worth pointing out that while the DNA evidence is strong, it doesn't prove that malaria killed Tutankhamun. Anyway, the point is that we simply don't know what killed Tutankhamun. Now, according to Live Science, there are hundreds of different kinds of Anopheles mosquitoes. So what was life like for Tutankhamun and other ancient Egyptians during malaria season? As for how ancient people treated the illness, the oldest written record of malaria comes from the Chinese, who described various herbal treatments in a book called the Shenong Ben Cao Jing, or the Divine Husbandman's Materia Medica. In fact, it was NT until 1880 when a French military officer named Charles Louis Alphonse Leverin discovered that malaria was caused by a parasite carried by mosquitoes. And yet, despite all of this, people still die from malaria today. But now you're probably asking yourself, should I wear bug spray when I go to the museum? As for Tutankhamun, it seems the curse was real after all, just not in the way most people thought. A small price to pay for a godlike status. Tutankhamun, or King Tut, if you're on a nickname basis, ruled Egypt around 1332-1323. BC, he was barely 9 when he became pharaoh, so basically a fortnight-addicted fourth grader in charge of an empire. But in 2010, scientists used CT scans and DNA testing and found he had a clubbed foot, genetic disorders, and malaria. And not just the, I had a fever for 2 days kind of malaria. This was severe, possibly multiple infections, which likely weakened his immune system, possibly leading to his early death. So yes, a mosquito, the ancient, buzzing, blood-sucking ninja, might have taken down one of the most powerful rulers in human history. There were instances where ambitious nobles seized the throne by force and established their own dynasties. Now, normally you might think, hey, DNA, you can just test the DNA, and you'd be right. But because this was a royal Egyptian mummy, the protocol was a bit more complicated. You see, by tradition, the bodies of important Egyptians were treated to a pretty thorough post-mortem makeover. He'd been studying a letter written by Howard Carter, the archaeologist who found King Tut's tomb. If it wasn't King Tut, then it must have been someone closely related to him who also had a clubbed foot. Sure enough, it turned out to be his mummy after all. And they found that he also had the genetic mutation responsible for the clubbed foot. But why was he put in the wrong tomb? Well, that's still a mystery. Y'all make it possible for us to bring mind-blowing history to the whole internet, and we appreciate the heck out of you for it. If you would like to join our amazing community of supporters, you can get started at our support page. Until next time, see you. It could have been a case of mistaken identity, or maybe a deliberate attempt to cover up the true burial site of one of Egypt's most famous pharaohs. Who knows? So they compared the DNA from the foot to that of several individuals believed to be descended from King Tut. And voila, they found a match with one individual in particular, a man named Ramesses, who was probably King Tut's half-brother, and it contained a peculiar detail. While describing the mummy, Carter noted that it had a deformed left foot which had been hidden under the bandages. So, as the scientists were analyzing their new sample, they kept this detail in mind. And what they found was shocking. Maybe it's because he reminds us that even the most powerful people in the world are unsafe from the little things in life, like mosquitoes. Or maybe it's because he's just such a great reminder of how little we really understand about our past. Either way, it seems like the Boy King's legacy will live on for many years to come. The bones in the foot had fused together in such a way that the big toe was facing sideways. This condition, called a calcaneus valgus, is extremely rare, occurring in only about 1 in 100,000 people today. That meant removing organs, wrapping the body in linen, and anointing it with fragrant oils. Not exactly a walk in the park for modern scientists trying to extract usable DNA, so if either of these guys wanted to rule, they had both the means and the opportunity. They extracted and sequenced its mitochondrial DNA, the kind that comes from your mother and is found in the cell's powerhouse, the mitochondria. Well, to find out, the team needed to try a different DNA sequencing technique that would allow them to analyze the nuclear DNA, the stuff that comes from both parents. But this method requires much larger samples, which seemed impossible given how picked over the mummy was. Luckily, scientists got a huge break when they received another sample from the same mummy, a small piece of bone from the mummy's left foot. This particular bit of DNA tells us what kinds of physical features the ancient Egyptians might have had. So, in this case, it should tell us whether the famous mummy looked like King Tut. After comparing the DNA sequence to those of other ancient Egyptian mummies, the scientists could confirm that yes, this mummy was related to King Tut, but there was a twist. Its mitochondrial DNA matched that of a woman named Queen Ea, a member of the royal bloodline and the great-great-grandmother of King Tut. In other words, this mummy was a descendant of King Tut, but not King Tut himself. Seriously, can we ban kids from playing God mode? It's dangerous. Like some of us are bad at returning phone calls, which is a terrible quality for someone who does voice acting for a living, and in this case, there are two distinct groups of them. First up, the royal bloodline. Tutankhamun is thought to be the son of Akhenaten, who ruled before him, and they do look kinda similar. Plus, several historical records refer to Tutankhamun as Akhenaten's successor. Then there's Smenkhare, also known as General Horemheb. According to a few ancient accounts, he was a general who briefly served as regent for Tutankhamun before the king took over. However, the records are pretty vague, and there's no way to say for sure whether or not Smenkhare was related to Tutankhamun or even if he was ever regent at all. But for the boy king Tutankhamun, his fatal flaw was literally being a dead ringer for King Tut. Because while he may have been born in 1341 BC, nobody knew that until 2010. When scientists discovered that his mummy was actually King Tut's after all. The truth is, the identity of this famous teen pharaoh has been a mystery since archaeologists unearthed his tomb in 1922. And it took nearly a century and some seriously cutting-edge science to finally figure out why. For centuries, people thought he was murdered. I mean, his tomb was fancy, his death was sudden, and his body was kind of broken, a fatal flaw. We're all terminally flawed. Like any good murder mystery, it helps to know the suspects. As for motive, well, in the time of the pharaohs, the line of succession wasn't exactly clear-cut. The evidence. In 2010, an international team of scientists set out to identify the mummy once and for all. Still, they managed to get a tiny sample from the mummy. So who was it? Now, to get to the bottom of all this, they enlisted the help of someone outside the royal bloodline. A man named Peter Clayton, an Egyptologist who runs a website devoted to the history of ancient Egypt. Putting the pieces together, the team now had enough evidence to make an educated guess about the mummy's identity. So what happened to the real King Tut? Well, to find out, scientists tested his mummy. What we do know is that young Tutankhamun had a rough go of it. Despite his early death, his story still fascinates us thousands of years later. Thank you for watching this episode, which was brought to you in part by our incredible community of patrons. So the big reveal is a mosquito ended a pharaoh. No poison goblet, no Cleopatra drama. Just one infected mosquito, probably chilling near the Nile, waiting for its royal snack. Now you might be thinking mosquitoes don't usually go for kings. They go for regular folks like me and you. Well, in this case, it seems that our tiny terror didn't care about royal status. A bunch of later pharaohs tried to erase any mention of him, kind of like he was some embarrassing ex you don't talk about. And most of us know why. Having a kid who dies young sucks, but having an entire royal line cut short by said kid dying young. Some historians think that Tut got bumped off by his advisor, General I, so I could take the throne. In 2010, researchers analyzed tissue samples taken from King Tut's mummy. This team had specialists ranging from geneticists and anthropologists to Egyptologists and forensic scientists. In fact, this species of mosquito might have been the main reason that so many Egyptians, royalty and otherwise, ended up with malaria. After all, the DNA was found in his nasal cavity, which means that the mosquito didn't necessarily bite him right before he died. It could have gotten in his tomb afterward, for example. Plus, tons of people from back then have Anopheles gambia DNA in their remains, and none of them seem to have died from a mosquito bite. So what makes King Tut different? Well, according to the study's authors, it could have been a combination of factors. Maybe Tutankhamun was already sick from a mosquito bite and the parasite had weakened his immune system. On top of that, his sickle cell trait would have made it harder for him to fight off any infections. It's even possible that another microbe present in his remains contributed to his death. Last but not least, sometimes even healthy people can have severe reactions to mosquito bites. So it's not totally far-fetched to think that one bite sent King Tut to his grave. These mosquitoes usually get their start by biting infected humans or animals. It's like the universe had a sense of humor. But hey, it happened. And now we can share the story with you. Thanks for watching this episode of Sea Show. If you want to learn more about the science behind infectious diseases, check out the link in the description below. And thanks to our supporters for supporting us. Then they pass along whatever they picked up to the next person or animal they bite. For example, malaria parasites spend part of their lives inside mosquitoes. So if you get bitten by an infected mosquito, you'll also get infected with malaria. Even worse, mosquitoes can also transmit bacteria and viruses. So it's entirely possible that one infected mosquito decided to end King Tut's reign. They did everything they could to answer the question on everyone's mind: how did King Tut die? Before we move on, let us just say that they did not find a poisoned cup or traces of cyanide in his bones. Nobody got poisoned. No assassinations here. But what they did find was yet another infectious disease, this time a parasite called Anopheles gambia. You may have heard of it before. It's better known as the malaria mosquito. They found that he had a genetic variant linked to a protein called sickle cell. This protein helps carry oxygen throughout the body. But with this genetic variant, the protein kinda malfunctions, which makes it harder for red blood cells to do their job. This means that King Tut was probably pretty vulnerable to all sorts of illnesses, including malaria. But again, the tissue samples didn't have any actual malaria parasites in them. By 2015, researchers were ready to blame another culprit, bacteria. They found traces of Staphylococcus aureus, a type of bacteria that causes skin and blood infections in King Tut's remains. Once again, this didn't explain how he died. So the hunt for answers continued. Others blame Queen Mother Tai, who might have thought that I marrying her daughter-in-law was a little too close for comfort. Still others think that the royals were just bad at medicine and Tut's death could have been totally preventable if they'd just done things differently. But these theories require a human touch, a sinister plot hatched by someone with lots of power and opportunity to harm the king. Scientists also needed to consider something else, random chance. After all, Tutankhamun's father, grandfather, and great-grandfather were all related. Inbreeding was common among the royal families back then. And we know that malaria and other infectious diseases can be extra rough on people with weakened immune systems. That's tragic. To top it off, Tutankhamun's successor, Smenkhare, also died young, leaving the throne to Ai. And A's own son was next in line after him. This succession mess wasn't good for anyone, especially not for the royal mosquito bite. It went for the royal blood. Let's get into it. This was a big deal. Most royal tombs had been robbed long ago, and finding this one led to a ton of publicity and ticket sales for the Egyptian government. King Tut became way more famous than all the pharaohs who actually stayed alive longer than him, and scientists have been picking apart his story ever since. One recent study dug into Tut's death certificate, well, not literally his death certificate, but you know what I mean. Turns out it doesn't say how he died. It just says he had trouble breathing. This isn't surprising. The last official account of his illness came from his chief physician, who reported that the king had malaria. Malaria is a type of fever that comes from parasites carried by mosquitoes. At first, this connection made researchers think that the deadly parasite, Plasmodium, killed Tut, but when they looked at his bones, they saw no signs of malaria. So there's still a lot we don't know about what really went down. King Tutankhamun, aka King Tut, was born in 1341 BC. His dad was Pharaoh Akhenaten, who really went for that unique parenting vibe, ditching tradition, moving the empire's center of gravity to a new city called Akhetaten, which we now call Amarna. He also tried to make everyone worship just one god instead of the usual many gods. That's dedication. You can tell he was pretty different by how much he messed with Egypt's art style, making everyone look super skinny and long-headed. Kind of looks like an ancient version of those avatars people made in that one social media app. But while Akhenaten was busy with his art project/religious revolution, the royal court got a little out of hand. Some nobles weren't too keen on the whole one god thing, and Queen Nefertiti got mysteriously demoted. We don't know exactly what happened. There are theories about her getting the noble, non-royal treatment, but nobody knows for sure. Akhenaten and the royal family were known for being into artsy stuff. The king wrote love poems to his wife, and they had 6 daughters together, but no sons. Their youngest daughter, Enkisenamun, was Tut's twin sister. She was only 11 when Tut became pharaoh. Maybe her dad's obsession with non-traditional stuff rubbed off on her because she would later try to break tradition herself. As soon as she was old enough, she wanted to wed and produce an heir. King Tut didn't feel the same. He was only 13 at the start of his reign and seemed pretty content with never having kids. Luckily, one of Akhenaten's advisors was also his uncle, General Ai, and he saw the royal succession crisis coming. So when Tut married Enkisenamun at age 15, I also married the king's sister, Princess Izit, and bore him a son. Everyone was happy except maybe Enkisenamun. Her marriage was childless and she wanted a baby, so she took matters into her own hands. She sent messengers to the Hittite king to ask for a husband. But before her proposal arrived, Tut died at age 19. Now, even though Tut's life was short, he left quite the legacy. In 1922, a British archaeologist named Howard Carter found Tutankhamun's tomb almost completely intact. This lack of answers gave rise to tons of theories. So while the mystery deepened, scientists turned to forensic science for clues. In 2022, a group of scientists from around the world joined forces for one last analysis of Tutankhamun's remains. Anopheles gambia are mostly found in sub-Saharan Africa today. But between 1500 BC and 500 BC, they were hanging out in the Nile River Valley. But wait, we're not done yet. Just because they found Anopheles gambia DNA in the Kid King doesn't mean that they actually killed him. To me, the idea that a mosquito could bring down a divine ruler is just wild. Hey, everybody, let's get back to some royal mishaps. The royals we've covered so far may not have been the most likable people, but they certainly had the best stories. Everyone thinks this is going to be a disaster, but then he restores Egypt and things are looking great. Well, we don't know much about it because he ruled for such a short time. In that time, he did accomplish quite a bit. The Nile flooded that year, which could have spread waterborne diseases. In addition to this, he suffered from several bouts of malaria as a child, which weakened his immune system. If this is true, that could have been a horrible way to die. After he inherited the throne, he married his half-sister. His body was full of ailments. He had a clubfoot, a limp, a receding jaw, a huge head, and an abnormal spine. He was only 4 feet 11 when he died. And he likely died before he started his period of rule, meaning he was born with these conditions. Most of his health problems were likely caused by incest. But in some parts of the world, they don't have access to preventative measures like bug spray and bed nets. Every year they're taking out thousands upon thousands of people, including babies. You know what else is small but deadly? The art in the thumbnail. Someone spent hours making it, and you can see it in glorious detail if you click off. Just kidding. You don't have to do that to support the channel. All you need to do is hit that thumbs up button, so click on that. If you haven't already, subscribe. That's why it's important to understand where these diseases come from and how we can stop them. It's not always a battle against an invisible enemy. Sometimes it's against a tiny flying menace that can ruin your picnic in seconds. That's why mosquitoes are still doing damage, but this is something we can prevent. We have the technology and the knowledge to stop these tiny assassins. One example is the OR mosquito trap. It lures mosquitoes in and electrocutes them. As of now, there are around 700 of these devices in use. In 2016, they killed over 70,000 mosquitoes in Uganda. His parents were brother and sister, and Tut had multiple siblings. In total, their kids accounted for 40% of the population of the royal court. It's safe to say that they weren't the healthiest bunch. Everyone thought that was weird, but if Akhenaten poisoned her, that might explain why. People have speculated that he had a deformed skull, and others say he was perfectly normal. There are so many unanswered questions about him, which is what makes him so fascinating. One thing is for sure, he deserves so much more than rumors and gossip. He deserves answers. Maybe he thought Tut would make a better puppet king. But in reality, mosquitoes are taking out way more people than anyone else. According to National Geographic, mosquitoes are responsible for 1 million deaths every year. That's 3,000 deaths every day. Malaria is the worst offender, but they also carry diseases like dengue fever, yellow fever, encephalitis, and Zika virus. It's safe to say mosquitoes aren't too picky. They'll go after whoever they want. He could control Tut like he did his wife, or maybe he planned on having another son and he wanted to get rid of the competition. Either way, if he poisoned his own son, that would mean he would have no problem getting rid of someone else. Maybe Tut advisors and priests were worried that he was losing control and decided to end the king's life. This could explain why there are so many inconsistencies in Tut's medical files. Maybe they were tampered with. Again, this is all speculation, and it's hard to say if this is true. Sometimes the simplest explanation is the correct one. Maybe Tut just had a bad case of malaria and lost his life. Imagine being 19 years old and you break your leg. You're bedridden thinking it's gonna heal. Then it gets infected and you start running a fever. Not exactly a walk in the park. Then you hear the doctors say they have an idea to help you feel better. And that idea is letting some blood out. Bloodletting was popular in those days, but it doesn't really do anything to fix the problem. In fact, it usually makes it worse because you lose the blood that's trying to fight the infection. It's possible that this is what happened to Tut, and that it was a botch. And like malaria, blood poisoning can kill you. Or he could have contracted it from Ankh-Mahor, who was visiting from Nubia. Some believe that Tut was kicked in the groin by a donkey while riding in his chariot. If this is true, he would have probably died instantly, depending on where he was kicked, of course. But there is some evidence to support this theory. In a papyrus, there is a drawing of a donkey with the pharaoh's emblem on it. And in front of the donkey is a broken leg bone. Now, this could just be a coincidence, but the timing is uncanny. Another piece of evidence is the bandages found in his tomb. They were used to treat a broken fibula, which is not uncommon in chariot accidents. Of course, this could just be speculation, but it's still an interesting theory. Either way, malaria was rampant in Egypt, so it makes sense that the king would fall victim to it, especially considering his age. The symptoms of malaria include fever, chills, and anemia. These symptoms can eventually lead to kidney failure and death. We don't know what caused Tut's death, but Howard Carter, the man who found his tomb, believed it was malaria. Like I said before, his dad made a lot of enemies during his reign, and Tut tried to mend those fences, though he did piss off the bigwig in the north. He was a weak ruler, but like Peter Parker, he took his responsibilities seriously and wanted to do right by Egypt. For most of his reign, he didn't even leave the palace. Instead, he appointed senior officials to run the country for him, which might explain why he became so popular. He wasn't running around killing people left and right. He just sort of kept to himself. The kid was a pacifist. There are no records of him starting any wars, which is amazing considering his family tree. Then he dies when he's only 19. Ever since he was found in 1922, Egyptologists have been trying to figure out why. What's the craziest part is that there are so many theories, and most of them have nothing to do with the curse that's apparently plaguing these videos. No, not this episode. Oh, wait, but today's subject was actually a pretty cool guy, even if he did pass away way too early. Yep. Today we're covering none other than King Tutankhamun, aka King Tut. Amenhotep III would have been proud. All in all, he was a good, albeit very young, king who seemed to care for his people. So it's no wonder we've become fascinated with him. And it's definitely worth exploring how he died. I think everyone knows the basics of this story. A young boy takes over after his father, Akhenaten, dies. Before we dive into this king's demise, let's take a moment to honor his life. He also moved Egypt's capital back to Thebes and replaced Akhenaten's sun god with the old gods, including the one that Tut's grandfather built his empire on. The first theory, malaria. This is considered the most likely cause of Tut's death. It could have come from a few different sources. Theory no. 2. Complications from a broken leg. When Tut was 8 years old, he broke his left kneecap, which could have led to infection and blood poisoning. Theory no. 3. A freak donkey accident. That's right. Theory no. 4. He was poisoned. Tut was only 13 when his father died. But while we don't know what took him out, we do know how it affected him. Tut's legacy has lived on long after he died. So why does this mosquito story matter? Well, this kid was royalty, so it's bound to be more dramatic. In ancient Egypt, it was easy to blame something like malaria on the gods. Today, we know better. This isn't just some crazy conspiracy theory where everyone's after you and there's a mosquito out to get you. They are after you. And that's how one of history's most beloved royals met his end at the hands of the world's tiniest hitmen.